This is a Westside High School tutorial on how to draw and shade a football. The first step is to get the actual shape of the football down and correct. And when I did this, I was really kind of looking at the axis from the tip of each side of the football, noticing that it wasn't straight up and down, that it was kind of off center. Then when I was looking at the different elements like the white stripes on there, looking and comparing with some lines on that as well, noticing that the right side was a little bit farther down than the left, and then kind of looking at that curve. When I drew the line in the middle where the laces go, again, I was comparing the left side to the right, noticing that the left side was a little bit bigger and the right side was a little bit smaller. You probably want to draw in a lot of kind of sketchy lines to really get the correct ones, and then go back and erase to get your finalized lines. When I started drawing the laces in, there's two components of the laces. There's kind of a top part that's a little bit lighter, that's kind of more of a rectangle shape, and then there's a bottom part that's kind of a small little crescent or sliver that's underneath it. The other thing I noticed as I was drawing these is that the bottom ones are a little bit bigger and they get a little bit smaller as they're going up towards the top and kind of arcing away from you. So those are two things to notice. After I got the horizontal part of the laces, then I went and added the vertical parts. They're basically two little rectangles next to each other, and down at the bottom they just meet up to that first crescent moon, and as you get towards the top they kind of go into that crescent moon shape. So kind of really notice and look closely at those shapes and where they enter one another. After you get the basic shapes down, you can start to add some shading. And for this part, really noticing that the white stripes indeed are lighter than the rest of the value of the football, and kind of assess how what shades each part is going to be. Here, after I have some of the shading around those laces, I started to put in the shadow part on the bottom side of the laces. So that's kind of that crescent moon shape, starting to put in that value, making it look a little bit more three-dimensional. Then you'll notice here it really pops off of the football, those laces do, because of that shadow that I put down underneath. I really kind of was looking at the left end of the lace and how that angle kind of met down with the bottom left part of that shadow, how the shadows were a lot bigger towards the bottom and they were really small and thin towards the top. So you're really kind of, consistently looking at comparisons here, and where all those dark values and shadows lie and how big the shapes of each of them are. After I got in the shading of those laces, I went and added the overall value that was in on that football, noticing, kind of similar to an egg, that you have a highlight on this particular photo or football. The highlight was towards the right side, and how it gets a little bit darker towards the edges then away from that highlight. It's also really dark at the bottom because of the way the light is hitting. That bottom left side was really dark as well. So similar to an egg, you kind of want to think about that shading, making sure that that football looks round. And I would do all of that shading before you add any of the details. So you really just want to get in kind of the basic lights and darks that you see. And then in the next slide, we'll go ahead and start putting on some of those details of the bumps of the football. When you start to add these bumps, when you look up closely at them, they're kind of like little circles. In a football, they are actual bumps that are raised. So you can see, because of the light direction, again, coming from the top right, you're going to have more shadow down on the bottom left. So as I did these, they're kind of just small little circles. I started with a circular shape, and then I put a little bit more value towards the bottom. You can see in the actual photograph that the bumps are actually kind of lined up along that seam a little bit more straight. And as you're doing this, I wouldn't be absolutely meticulous about putting exactly every single bump in the right spot. You just want to look at kind of overall getting the idea of that texture in, and adding that all over. You'll also notice that on the right side, those circles are much, much smaller, and in some parts don't even really look like circles, because as that texture wraps around the football, it's a little bit more harder to see, and it's kind of condensed together, so your objects become smaller as they curve around the side. You can see in this slide how I've kind of built up that whole area of that white part of the lace, and I'm starting to work a little bit below and above. You can also see the little lines of the hash marks that I made on the right side of the football. You might want to draw in some kind of lines as a guide to show you where those little circle shapes might fall. In some areas of the football, it may look really random, and in some areas, the circles might kind of line up in a row. I'm adding the little bumps to the bottom part. I've kind of worked a little bit more, maybe in some areas lightened up a little bit with an eraser, and then gone back in and made that bottom part a little bit darker to really make that appear like a 3D bump. It's that contrast between the highlight on the top and the darkness on the bottom that's going to make that bump appear 3D. This is the last slide. You kind of just see me continuing to work a little bit more towards the left, adding a little bit more of that shadow along that seam, along those bumps, and continuing to fill those in. Again, on that left side, just like on the far right, as it wraps around the side of the football, those little circles get even smaller and closer together. One thing you'll notice on these is that all of those circles are indeed touching. There's not spaces between them. If you were to do something like a basketball, instead of it having a circle that you kind of outline, you would do the reverse. You would still do the overall shading first, and then when you add the detail, they're going to be circles that are more filled in, and those circles will be same evenly spaced, but with a little bit of space between them where you see some lighter areas. Basically, the biggest things to remember: looking where your light is coming from, both in your overall shading and your shadows, but also the shadows and those small little bumps. Make sure the bumps are right up next to each other, and that you kind of vary their position. Hope this helps. Good luck shading.